Story 1. The brother of the groom stood up when the priest said, "If anyone opposes the marriage between him and her, speak now or forever hold your peace." The brother proposed to his girlfriend of 2 months. She was embarrassed and apologized to everyone. She declined the proposal. The brother reacted with anger, accusing her of cheating and revealing that he only proposed to see if she was loyal to him. In his mind, if she said yes, it meant she had been faithful. Since she declined, he believed it meant she had been sneaking around. It gets worse. He admitted he slept with 2 other people to seek revenge. Story 2. The bride did not show up. Everyone was waiting in a large church, including the groom, who waited at the altar for 30 minutes. Then the bride's father entered and announced that she had decided she did not want to get married. However, since he had already paid for the reception, all the guests were encouraged to go ahead with the party. Story 3. It was a destination beach wedding, and the bride and groom allegedly spent over $100,000 on the entire event, which was completely outdoors, with no contingency plan for some reason. It rained heavily. It actually wouldn't have been so bad had they started on time, but the bride kept everyone waiting for about 30 minutes. During that time, we watched the sky get darker and darker until it opened up and poured right as the wedding party came out. It was already a bit awkward because in the water behind the altar, there was an ugly, rusty cargo ship coming close to shore, and there were people off to the sides of the wedding area enjoying the beach. At least the reception was fun once everyone let go of caring about how they looked and smelled after getting drenched. Story 4. I was probably 9 or 10 years old, so this was over 16 years ago. A family friend was getting married, so my family attended. The bride's father had passed away due to a heart attack a few weeks prior. His wake and funeral service took place about a week before the wedding. He had experienced a major cardiac event while driving on the highway, causing a car accident, but he had already died before his car came to a stop. It was very sudden and traumatic for everyone involved. The wedding was beautiful. All sorts of efforts to honor the father of the bride were placed around the reception hall. A chair with his favorite coat and hat hanging on it was at the head table, along with a sweet framed poem in the seat about always saving a spot for him. The father had even recorded himself singing the song for the father-daughter dance as a surprise for everyone long before he passed. And it played while the bride's only brother danced with her in his father's place. It was both sweet and sad, with the entire room of over 300 guests in tears. The mother of the bride walked outside, presumably for fresh air, midway through the dance. It was an emotional song and dance, given the circumstances, so no one thought anything of it when she needed a moment to collect herself. When it came time for her to dance with the bride shortly after the father-daughter dance had ended, she was nowhere to be found. The brother went outside looking for her, and we all heard him wailing in agony. The guests rushed outside to find the mother of the bride unresponsive on the ground. She had suffered a major cardiac event. This family was all in the medical field, so a man in full formal attire began performing chest compressions on her, while a frantic crowd tried to shield the children from seeing it and dispersed to call for help. It was a no-cell phone reception, and we had all been shuttled from the parking lot to the venue, which was only about a quarter to a third of a mile away. So everyone was sprinting back to their vehicles to find a phone to call for help, navigating down a gravel and dirt path in flowing gowns and tuxedos. She didn't survive. Story 5. The groom's aunt got drunk and spilled all the details about the groom actually being in love with his friend, who coincidentally was also attending the wedding. It was extremely awkward. Story 6. The bride, my aunt, specifically stated that she wanted a floral design in pastel pink and sky blue. The designer agreed, took notes, and assured her that he would create it according to her wishes. After the vows, we went to the after-party venue, which was Christmas-themed. Happy Merry Christmas to them, I suppose? Story 7. My cousin hired her friend, who was supposedly a DJ, and he was playing music from a streaming service. There were advertisements playing in between songs. Eventually, someone else took over the auxiliary connection who actually had a subscription to a music streaming service. Overall, it was a fun wedding, though. Story 8. The wedding venue was left open, and someone stole all of the alcohol behind the bar on the morning of the wedding. Without tipping off the bride about the mishap, The groom authorized the opening of all of the cards with money and sent someone with a Costco card to buy all of the missing alcohol again. The bride obviously found out after the ceremony, but everything turned out great afterwards. However, the stress we all experienced was significant. Story 9. The wedding was at a barn in a remote location. The food was brought in from the city, about 45 minutes away. I remember fried chicken and mac and cheese, but not much else. It was a fun wedding overall. We returned to the hotel, which was a 10-minute drive. The bride was throwing up in the parking lot, possibly from drinking too much. A couple of other people were also sick in the parking lot. Well, they are young, and that happens at weddings. Then I went upstairs, and it suddenly hit me. I was sick for 3 days. If I had died, I would have been fine with it. It was the worst food poisoning of my life. Later, I discovered that pretty much everyone was sick to some extent. Good times. Story 10. 2 waiters were engaged in a full-on karate fight in the reception hall. The rest of the waitstaff quickly moved them into a back room, but one of the waiters was flipped over a table. 2 weeks later, the best man and another guest almost got into a fight. Then the best man's wife, who was also a guest, ended up fighting. It was chaotic. I wasn't at this event, but my friend told me that during a reception he attended, the bride's uncle parasailed over the crowd towing a banner. A short time later, the power went out. Eventually, a couple of police officers arrived and explained that the uncle had accidentally hit some power lines and did not survive. Story 11. The funniest story I ever heard was about a bride who, for a laugh, answered no to the "do you take" question during the ceremony. The vicar immediately halted the ceremony and stated that he refused to marry them. They had to go through all the pre-marriage requirements again and ended up getting married 6 weeks later. Story 12. I attended a wedding at a family-run go-kart track. The vows were lovely and held by a large pond. The reception began, and hamburgers were served from the go-kart snack bar. I knew the mother of the bride had worked all summer for free as a waitress at a local restaurant in exchange for catering the event. So I was surprised to see the family grilling burgers out the window. I went to McDonald's down the road because I've never liked their burgers, and they were struggling to keep up. I returned about an hour later, and there was a strange vibe in the air. I thought it was because the mother of the bride had been scammed regarding the dinner agreement, causing everyone to feel unsettled. People were still partying, but something was off in the main group. I didn't see the bride and groom much in the main party area. There was no mingling. When I did see them, they weren't together and were sticking close to their respective groups. It turned out the groom had caught the bride with the best man, and it had been going on for months. I felt terrible for the mother of the bride. This was the second wedding she had paid for her daughter. She had been scammed, only to find out her daughter was being unfaithful, and the marriage didn't last as long as one of the many unpaid shifts she worked to pay for it. Story 13. It wasn't at the wedding, but at the after-party where her brother proposed. The girl he proposed to said yes because she was put on the spot. Afterwards, she called him out for it, and they broke up. Story 14. Nothing crazy, but I was at a wedding where guests were supposed to open little envelopes and release a butterfly at the end of the ceremony. When we opened the envelopes, all the butterflies were either dead or almost dead. It was super awkward. If you watch Bob's Burgers, there's a similar scene in an episode. The first time I saw it, I immediately thought of that wedding. I had no idea this comment would gain so much attention. It's sad to hear other stories of dead butterflies. Story 15. I was a kid when I bit into a bitterball fresh from the deep fryer. The thing was hot enough to burn my skin, so I reflexively threw it onto the bride's wedding dress. Now I had a burnt mouth and saw the stain on her dress, which made me start crying. The bride, being the absolute champion she is, comforted me, grabbed a fold of her dress, and covered the stain as if nothing had happened. She's the kind of person I'm striving to be. Story 16. I almost died on my way to my own wedding with my father in the car. We were driving to the church in a limousine that my dad knew the owner from the bar. That should have been a red flag. Everything was fine except the old man driver was very intoxicated at 11 a.m. We didn't realize he was so drunk until he sped through a stop sign on a tight turn on a two-lane country road. At that moment, I was telling my dad he was going too fast to stop around the bend. Straight ahead was a farmer's field. Miraculously, no one was driving on the other road when we blew through the intersection, and no one was sitting at the stop sign. I would guess he was probably going 40 to 45 miles per hour. Don't ask me how he managed to get out of the field, but he did. I clearly remember my father reprimanding him for being so drunk and nearly killing us. This happened in 1988. Story 17. Oh boy, where do I start? The grandmother of the groom died. She passed away at the hotel in her sleep, right after the wedding. Nobody saw it coming either. She was on her feet the entire evening. It was the most solemn continental breakfast I've ever attended. The vows were also quite awkward. To sum it up, the bride's vows basically were, "I'll always remember not to bother you on Mondays and Wednesdays. Those are your designated gaming days." Additionally, some of the most uncomfortable speeches I've ever heard in my life were given. The sister of the bride clearly did not approve of her sister's choice of husband and expressed this during her speech. Story 18. My sister had a seizure at my wedding, and my mother made a huge spectacle out of it, being overly dramatic and fake crying. My sister exclaimed, "You called an ambulance." "I'm fine." My mother wouldn't allow me into the bridal suite because she didn't want to upset me. I just wanted to eat. Finally, I barged in, and my sister and I stuffed our faces while she relaxed in the suite to recover. I think it was the camera flashes that triggered it. My mother loves to make a big deal out of everything, always seeking attention. Story 19. A fight broke out during the reception and spilled into the parking lot. The bride's father and groom, who were on the same side, were in the thick of it while the bride's mother was physically restraining the bride in the back of the limousine. Both the father of the bride and the groom were arrested, along with several others. The fight resumed at the hotel after everyone was released, resulting in more arrests, including the bride, who no longer had her mother to hold her back. There was no honeymoon, and felony assault served as an unexpected wedding gift for both the bride and groom. The unusual aspect of this incident was that it was not gang-related, and there was no prior conflict. One of the groom's friends was a very angry drunk, and after being bumped at the buffet, he triggered a reaction from some of the other individuals involved. It was chaotic. We were there as friends of the bride's parents, and while we were in the limousine, the bride was shouting about her father being in the fight outside, with her mother wrapping her arms and legs around her to restrain her. Story 20. The bride was pregnant and she had a miscarriage at the wedding reception. Typing this still feels surreal to me, even though it was 30 years ago. Story 21. I attended a wedding where the bride and groom had a Rottweiler that they truly loved, and they had invested in some intense training for him. The dog even participated in the ceremony as the ring bearer, which was quite cute. However, during the reception, in the middle of their first dance, a man kicked open the door of the ballroom and burst in, shouting, "Babe, I miss you. Don't do this." The bride responded, "What are you doing? This is over. I don't want to see you." The man lunged at her, and suddenly the dog attacked him. It bit down on his arm and wrestled him to the ground. People began screaming, and children were crying. The situation turned chaotic. Then, unexpectedly, the man stood up as if nothing had happened, and the bride announced that he was their dog trainer. And this was a demonstration of the dog's defensive abilities. He took a bow and revealed the padded shield he had under his shirt, then had the dog perform a few normal tricks. We all politely applauded. He walked out of the room, and then they finished their first dance as if it had not been a traumatic experience for everyone else. Story 22. I was a +1 at a wedding where I barely knew the groom and had only met the bride once before. During the reception, I stopped at the bathroom and found the bride sitting alone in a stall, crying. She didn't want to get married but felt obligated because she and the groom had been intimate. Although she wasn't pregnant, as a member of the Mormon faith, she felt she had to marry him. At just 19, she believed she was too young for marriage and felt she had no choice. I stayed with her for about half an hour, comforting her until her grandmother came in and took over. I returned to the party, and the groom was completely unaware that his new wife was missing or that she was devastated. My husband lost touch with that friend after he got married. We ran into him years later and asked how he was doing. They had 4 children under the age of 5, and he was thrilled to be a father. I wonder how she felt and if he had any idea about her feelings. Story 23. Certainly not the worst, but at my own wedding, it stormed so violently as the guests walked from their cars into the church that no umbrella could keep them from getting absolutely soaked. I'm talking drenched. A lightning strike took out the power, so the microphones and audio system didn't work. You couldn't hear anything that the pastor or anyone else said. Additionally, the church had no air conditioning, and it was the middle of summer with 100% humidity. My sister, the maid of honor, fainted at the altar due to the heat and because she locked her knees. Luckily, my uncle caught her and she made a quick recovery. Alas, the show went on. The sun eventually came out for the reception. Still insane humidity. Everyone drank the venue out of beverages, and my husband and I are still happily married 15 years later. Story 24. A photographer collapsed and died after entering the reception area. I believe it was a cardiac event, but I'm not certain. He had been sweating profusely beforehand, which I remember clearly. Story 25. The father of the groom's speech went something like this. Bride, we never thought he would marry you. You weren't his first love. Then followed a lengthy monologue about the groom's love for cars, his son, and his granddaughter, concluding the speech. There was nothing mentioned about the bride. No kind words welcoming her to the family. Just, we didn't think he'd marry you. I was absolutely floored. Story 26. I attended a wedding a few years ago where the caterer suffered a heart attack right after the buffet was set up for dinner. The bride and groom stayed with him and ensured he was breathing while waiting for the ambulance. Story 27. A guest became highly intoxicated and decided that vomiting on the floor was inappropriate. Instead, they vomited in another guest's baby carrier. They also engaged in a confrontation with venue staff while being escorted out, resulting in their dress being hiked up and personal areas being exposed. Story 28. The bride's family did not attend the wedding. They did not approve of her marrying a white man. He was white and Welsh. She was Indian, and I believe she was Muslim, though I could be mistaken about her faith. After the wedding, she received death threats from her father and brothers for dishonoring the family. So she and her husband moved to New Zealand, where they are now living their best lives. Story 29. Friends attended a wedding during COVID. The bride and groom's 2 daughters had norovirus a few days before the event. After the ceremony, I approached the bride's mother to congratulate her, and she appeared green and sweaty. She told me she had been vomiting since the night before. Everyone became ill. The groom intermittently left the reception to vomit. 2 days later, I felt like I was on my deathbed. My partner and I had to take turns being sick. It was a nightmare. The bride lost many friends due to the situation because she did not inform anyone. I still think about the poor staff to this day. One guest confronted her after vomiting, explaining that it was her duty to inform the guests. The bride's response was inappropriate. That same guest had to delay starting chemotherapy because she was incapacitated for days. Story 30. Friend's wedding at a country club. They were in the middle of their vows during the ceremony when we suddenly heard a loud crash. One of the bride's young nephews, who was about 5 years old at the time, had taken one of the golf carts and crashed it into a tree. The child was okay, but it certainly put a damper on the event. Story 31. Wedding photographer. I have seen many weddings. The most awkward one, however, was when the bride was 4 hours late to her own wedding. She kept telling him that she was just finishing getting ready. They had arranged a car service for the wedding, so she couldn't blame a broken-down car. She waltzed into the venue as if nothing was wrong, did not apologize to the remaining guests, the venue staff, or the vendors. It opened her groom's eyes, I think, because he called it off right then and there. She threw a tantrum, and as a contracted vendor, I didn't want to leave in case they worked things out. But I got to watch him express everything that had obviously built up over time. When he left with his parents, I knew it was time for me to go. Story 32. The intoxicated uncle of the bride was flirting with all the bridesmaids and said one of the most hilarious things I've ever heard. Look at the backside on that one. He had to be removed and ended up wandering around in his underwear in the parking lot. Story 33. The wedding officiant forgot. Someone finally tracked her down, and she showed up 45 minutes late, intoxicated. She barely made it through the ceremony, starting and restarting several times at certain parts. It was very awkward for everyone, and the bride was annoyed. Story 34. The parents let the bride sing a song about love that she had written herself. We were at a table with some other unimportant people, but the elderly couple at our table whispered to the rest of us, they paid for a lot of those voice lessons. In retrospect, it was hilarious, like at the end of Dirty Dancing, where the mom says, I think she gets it from me, even though there's no evidence that the mom knows anything about dancing. When you were in the room, I was in bloom. When you told me you were in love, I knew it was what you were made of. In love. In love. It was so bad. It was reminiscent of the 1990s. Story 35. At our wedding, some torches were lit. My wife's uncle was leaning around trying to take a picture, and his head caught on fire. He was okay but lost some hair. Story 36. This situation is unfortunate, but it did not ruin the wedding. It was simply an awkward distraction. One of the bride's friends had recently lost her father and was crying during the father-daughter dance. She eventually excused herself and was in the bathroom with another friend who was trying to comfort her. I know she felt embarrassed, but the bride was understanding about it. Story 37. Oh, my wedding. My wife was going to walk down the aisle to Here Comes the Bride. I was standing in front of a huge crowd when the organist started playing. Suddenly, my mom, whom I hadn't spoken to in over a decade, walked in wearing a white dress. She had been invited, but I didn't expect her to attend. She showed up at the very last minute, and my wife kind of panicked and said, just go find a seat. When she arrived, it was perfectly bad timing. I had about 30 seconds to think, am I in a Freudian nightmare? Story 38. Well, there was a fight between the groom's family and some cousins who showed up. However, there was a far more interesting wedding I attended where the father of the bride gave a long, preachy speech that focused almost 90% on how his daughter was an obedient child. While mentioning that point could be appropriate in the context of showering praise, this speech specifically emphasized obedience to him, to her soon-to-be spouse, and to God. It was excessive. To top it off, when the officiant presented the new bride and groom, someone set off firecrackers inside the church on the altar. There was smoke everywhere. Story 39. The wedding was for the daughter of a very religious conservative family who discovered that she and her boyfriend were engaging in premarital sex. They pressured the couple into getting married to fix the sin they had committed. The mother, father, and priest took every opportunity during the ceremony and reception speeches to remind everyone that the bride and groom had premarital relations, expressing their disappointment that the marriage was beginning in sin. Story 40. The groom was on his phone the entire time. I flew to Mexico for the destination wedding with my kids, and he chose one of the most expensive hotels. He looked bored at his own wedding. Leading up to the event, he claimed he was sick and had the hotel staff bringing him cold towels and checking on him. Drama king. Up until the ceremony, the rest of the bride's friends and I were hoping she would back out. I was her maid of honor. Story 41. My mother's wedding was held at the same small venue, with the same poor menu and decor, as my father's funeral had been held a year earlier. It was a stark reminder to my 13-year-old self that my dad had passed away, and that she was a significant reason for his struggles with alcohol. Story 42. Everyone got food poisoning from the cake. First, the bride felt queasy and accidentally revealed to the whole family that she was pregnant, which upset my ex's grandmother, prompting her to leave early. During the drive home, my ex's sister started to feel sick, and their father refused to stop, so she vomited out of the open door while we drove a bit slower. I made it to their house before I projectile vomited strawberries all over a white wall. Back at the venue, 80% of the guests had a similar experience. Apparently, there was no room in the bathrooms, so people were vomiting at the tables. It took hours for guests to leave due to a chaotic scramble, which caused a traffic jam and at least one minor accident. The next day, we returned to help clean, still feeling dreadful. There was pink vomit everywhere. I managed only 5 minutes before leaving and heard about it endlessly from his mother until we broke up 8 months later. Story 43. My own wedding took place in Hawaii on the beach near the North Shore. There were signs on the beach warning about dangerous currents. I invited everyone to throw flowers in the surf to remember those they had lost. Then my groomsmen decided to go for a swim. 3 men entered the water, but only 2 made it out. The third almost didn't. Luckily, a man on a surfboard rushed in to pull him out. Then lifeguards arrived, complete with their yellow vehicles and red shorts. All 3 groomsmen ended up in the hospital after swallowing a lot of ocean water. As a result, the post-wedding luau was awkward, and my wedding pictures did not include any of my groomsmen. Fortunately, the husbands of the bridesmaids thought it would be amusing to wear matching Hawaiian shirts, which somewhat matched mine and the wedding colors. Therefore, the wedding pictures displayed in my house did not feature the actual wedding party. Now I'm divorced and only speak to one of the groomsmen. Story 44. The maid of honor, the bride's sister, gave a scathing speech. It was one of the meanest things I have ever sat through. She referred to the bride in a derogatory manner without holding back. I wanted to crawl into a hole after that experience. Story 45. My brother and I were seated at a table full of newlyweds, making us the only single guys there. Conversation was lacking, so I decided to use a little icebreaker. Is it true the first year of marriage is the hardest? The men agreed while the women disagreed. We then sat back and watched a lively debate unfold. Story 46. I used to work in a hotel where we often hosted weddings. The worst experience was when the bride and her mother-in-law were both extremely intoxicated and started fighting at the reception. Torn clothes, blood, smashed glass, it was not pretty. However, it must have seemed normal to the family and guests. After the participants were taken to their rooms to clean up and we cleaned the mess, the party continued for a few more hours, including the groom, who I can only assume was not very popular with either his wife or mother the next morning. Story 47. Not my story, but there was a young lady who knew about the free dessert offered by most restaurants if it was your birthday. She made a habit of asking for it at every new restaurant she and her friends visited. On her wedding day, when the bridal procession started, they let her get about 25% down the aisle. Then the music stopped, and everyone started singing "Happy Birthday to You." Story 48. A guest died on the way to the event. Their parents were also present and had to be informed at the end of the ceremony. Story 49. My best friend had a destination wedding that was planned almost 2 years in advance. No one from the bride's family attended, only the groom's parents, my husband and I, along with the bride and groom. It was a beautiful location, and my husband and I renewed our vows there years later. Story 50. The disc jockey and his girlfriend, who was the groom's sister, broke up at the beginning of the reception after a huge fight, so he packed up his equipment and left. Someone had to retrieve a boombox, as this was in the late 1980s, to ensure there was music for the remainder of the night. Story 51. Not really the worst, but funny regardless. My friend had a full weekend wedding where the venue allowed alcohol as bring your own bottle, but no hard liquor. So his dad filled the bed of his pickup truck with beer, wine, and hard seltzer. He had to go back out the morning of the wedding to get more, because we drank so much around a bonfire the night before. At a different wedding, there was an old family friend, I think he was a war buddy of my grandfather, but my grandfather was deceased, who was getting along with everyone and was just being a really fun, goofy old man. The guy got very drunk, but everyone had been buying him drinks all night, so he didn't have a tab. It took the bartender a solid 5 minutes to convince this man that he didn't have a tab to close out, and he was free to give a tip if he wanted, but they did not need his money. Story 52. The best man was very drunk during his speech and confessed he wished he had met the bride before the groom. His wife ended up sending him home alone in a rideshare halfway through the reception. Story 53. I was a supervisor with only 2 other people working under me. One of them invited me to his wedding. I knew that the ceremony was going to be small and expensive, so I only attended the reception. When I arrived, there was nothing there. It was an empty hall. Apparently, his parents opposed the marriage but pretended to support it. They did not buy the rings, kept the children away from the ceremony, and lied about booking the hall, decorations, and catering. Nothing had been done. I arrived to find the bride's family, who were enraged. They ordered chicken and set up some tables at the last minute to book the venue. When the groom showed up with the bride, her brothers tried to fight him. Overall, it was an absolute fiasco. Story 54. The best man got up and made a joke about how he couldn't believe the bride was wearing white, implying they had slept together the first day they met. He then asked if she should be drinking in her condition, even though she was not pregnant. I was seated near the bride's mother, and the look on her face is etched in my memory. Story 55. The best man professed his love during his speech and subtly suggested it should have been him instead. He also volunteered to be the DJ for the bride and groom to save them money before the wedding. After the ceremony, he went to the DJ booth and played 2 electronic dance music songs before abruptly shutting down the entire wedding and leaving. Additionally, the groom's mother had a significant need for attention and pulled her husband onto the dance floor during the first dance. Story 56. The wife fell ill just after the ceremony due to an allergic reaction and was rushed away in an ambulance. Everyone continued to party, and I was quite confused but joined in anyway. By the evening, around 8 p.m., she returned with a grand entrance, which was iconic but also unfortunate for her. She is a work colleague, and since we are both nurses, it was a humiliating moment for her to be taken to the emergency room in her wedding dress. Story 57. Not so much at the wedding itself but during it. My aunt got married in a backyard ceremony at her friend's house. It was a simple ceremony on a summer day with lots of friends and family. It was really nice. A couple of the neighbor children keyed every single car that was present, leaving deep scratches down both sides of dozens of cars from front to back. I was only around 10 years old at the time, so I'm not sure what happened afterward, but people who were there still talk about it occasionally. Story 58. I witnessed the most disappointing wedding toast at a friend's wedding. The bride's father and sister both gave lovely, heartfelt speeches, as did the father of the groom. Then the groom's brother took his turn. At this point in the reception, he was already several drinks in and looking disheveled with an untucked shirt, rolled-up sleeves, and sagging pants. He stepped up in front of over 150 people and started with, "I didn't write anything down," making a pointed reference to the other speakers who had read their toasts from their notes. He then went into a lengthy monologue about relationships, expressing his jealousy of his brother's and parents' relationships, and lamenting his own lack of luck in love. The entire situation felt awkward and repetitive. He concluded his speech by looking at his brother and saying, "Ride her more than you ride your motorcycle." Story 59. At my wedding, my husband's grandmother fell and broke her hip. She went to the hospital, had a pulmonary embolism, and then passed away. Story 60. An older family member was asked to be in the wedding party. It was really sweet, but this person is around 80 years old and had to stand through a ceremony that included various readings and songs. Just as I was thinking, this is a long ceremony, the family member passed out. Emergency services were called, and they were taken to receive medical attention. It was very upsetting, and people were crying. The ceremony paused until help arrived, but the ambulance was still out front when we left the church. We were also asked to stand there blowing bubbles as the couple exited for photos, which felt odd. They are okay now, but they didn't make it back for family photos or the reception, which is a shame. On a side note, the officiant mentioned that a wedding party member passing out has occurred in about 10% of the weddings he has officiated. Let your favorite people sit down if you want a long ceremony. Story 61. The groom told the bride right before the wedding that he did not want to get married. You could hear them arguing. 20 minutes later, they decided to proceed with the wedding. It lasted for 2 weeks. Story 62. When I was in college, my mom's best friend got married abroad in an extravagant black tie affair. Mom was the maid of honor. My dad walked the bride down the aisle, and my sisters and I were part of the bridesmaid party. It was a gorgeous wedding, and we had an amazing time, dancing all night. Early the next morning, as we were getting ready for the post-wedding brunch, we found out my grandma, my mom's mother, had passed away. My mom was devastated, and we all were, but she insisted we not tell anyone. Wipe our tears, put on smiles, and pretend to have fun so we wouldn't ruin the couple's wedding weekend. She said we could cry on the plane on our way home, but for now we were to bring nothing but joy to the party. Years later, my mom passed away. At her memorial, her best friend shared some pictures of us from that wedding weekend. You can see my mom's smile beaming, but her eyes looked so sad. Her friend didn't have a clue what my mom was going through at the time. She didn't find out until she returned from her honeymoon. So, she only had fond memories of that weekend. My mom was a good friend. Story 63. Civil War reenactment took place across the street from the church, with literal cannons firing continuously throughout the ceremony. Story 64. My cousin was getting married in a Catholic church, and she and her friends were tailgating with a keg before the wedding in the church's parking lot. Before starting the ceremony, the priest made a pointed comment about being respectful. When the bride's brother arrived at the altar as a groomsman, he made the sign of the cross with his middle finger. I wasn't there as I don't associate with that branch of the family, but I heard about it afterward. Apparently, the priest continued the ceremony and didn't acknowledge the incident. Honestly, I believe he should have walked away and ended the ceremony. Story 65. Not the worst, but pretty weird. I received a printed wedding invitation for 7 p.m. I arrived at 6:40 p.m., but the doors to the church were locked and the parking lot was empty. I walked around the entire church, and everything was locked. I rechecked my invitation and confirmed it was for a 7 p.m. wedding. So, I decided to get something to eat and returned around 7:15 p.m. People were just starting to arrive. Turns out the wedding started at 8 p.m., and I have a Latin-sounding last name. The bride was Hispanic and had 2 sets of invitations printed. Latinos received the 7 p.m. time, while others received the 7:30 p.m. time. It's crazy that they knew everyone would be late. Story 66. One of the best men had the key to the nuptial room. He got extremely drunk and was nowhere to be found. The bride had a meltdown. They ended up sleeping in separate rooms with other family members. In the morning, they found the man sleeping in his car. Story 67. 2 stories, neither of which were catastrophic by any means, but both were really strange. During the music played while everyone was arriving but before the ceremony started. The last song was performed by the mother of the bride. She came out and started singing From This Moment by Shania Twain, and it was clear from 3 notes in that she couldn't hold a tune. She warbled her way through the entire song, accompanied only by a violinist. There was no drowning it out. She was as loud as she was off-key. I spent most of it staring intently at the wedding program, concerned about what my face would look like if people could actually see it. I dislike secondhand embarrassment with a passion. It was the longest 3 minutes ever. I found out later that the bride was well aware her mother could not sing, but her mother believed she could and insisted on performing. Since she was paying for the wedding, the bride couldn't put her foot down. Her tears while walking down the aisle were partly from joy and partly from humiliation. The second wedding was a full Greek Orthodox ceremony. The husband was a part of that religion. The bride was not. I was attending on the bride's side, sitting with another mutual friend. The program for this wedding was 7 pages long, explaining all of the traditions, such as repeating things 3 times because of the Holy Trinity. After about 45 minutes, they arrived at the vows. Do you, Catherine? This seemed perfectly normal, except the bride's name was Robin. The priest kept repeating Catherine. I wondered if he was confusing her with another bride while everyone just went along with it. It turned out they forgot to mention in the 7-page program that the priest would be using the bride's baptismal name instead of her actual name. We only found out because my friend got some liquid courage at the reception and asked her about it directly. Story 68. Our friends got married. My wife and I left early because she wasn't feeling well and was tired, as she was pregnant with our son. A few hours after we left, our other friend, who was our driver, came to get us in a hurry and told us we had dodged a major drama bullet. The first mistake of the soon-to-be married couple was having only 3 pallets of beer, cider, and long drinks for all the guests. I can't remember how many people attended, but they did not account for the many relatives on both sides who liked to drink, which led to numerous pocket bottles. The bride's friends mishandled the coffee catering and thought it was a good idea to start giving away alcohol instead. The second mistake was that the bride and groom both had younger brothers who hated each other, and they made them both best men. The combined hatred and alcohol was a recipe for disaster, and they eventually started fighting. To this day, I don't know who started the fight, but soon the groom joined in along with the bride's father, uncle, and others. In the end, it turned into a chaotic brawl with multiple people from both sides involved. I felt bad for the bride because she witnessed this unfolding chaos and was crying her eyes out as it happened. Story 69. I was a bridesmaid in a wedding where we had to stay in the bridal suite and open all the cards to gather money to pay the photographer, because he refused to continue after the ceremony without payment. Story 70. Mine isn't too crazy, but my ex-husband and I were attending a friend's wedding. My ex's mother couldn't decide if she should wear a dress or her fancy jeans. She opted for the fancy jeans and stood out like a sore thumb. Story 71. I was at my cousin's wedding, and another wedding was taking place on the other side of the reception venue. I went to the shared restroom, and there I saw the bride with her maid of honor. The bride was crying, and while I washed my hands, I tried not to listen too much. To cut a long story short, her husband was completely drunk, acted inappropriately, and had insulted her. They both asked me if I wanted to take them somewhere else. I didn't have a car that night, so I declined, but I imagine it would have ended badly if I had gone with her. Another guest eventually took her away a little later. Another time, another cousin got married. 2 days later, her husband had a schizophrenic episode and tried to kill her. That's how I learned that in France, there is a 7-day period during which you can cancel a marriage without having to go before a judge. Lastly, my best friend's cousin was due to get married at 35. When the wedding night arrived, she panicked and didn't want her husband, so she ran off into the night. As the marriage had not been consummated, it was annulled, and she continued her life in a monastery. She is now 60 and still there. Story 72. No one attended the reception. It was bizarre. The room was set for about 100 people, but there were only around 30 of us at most. Story 73. One of the older aunts of the groom, probably in her 80s, had a heart attack and died. She slumped over in the chair and fell to the floor. She was gone. Paramedics arrived, but it took the wind out of the party. Story 74. None of my friends could come because of the changing COVID rules. Photographers only took photos of the bride getting ready. I felt alone until the wedding started. We had no dancing due to COVID fears and planned to have a party after the pandemic. After her pregnancy, my wife changed completely and no longer wanted to do anything. She had her family live with us for a year, which was difficult. She started traveling for work frequently and didn't make any time for me or our son. Then she left. There was no post-pandemic party, no effort to maintain our relationship, and she never looked at the wedding photos or videos. She didn't attend co-parenting counseling. It was a 4-year spiral. Story 75. About 10 years ago, a relative got married to the love of his life. When I entered the church, I recognized one of his colleagues, whom he had always referred to as his work wife. It turned out that he also had a work child. The work wife had brought their toddler, who was a little copy of my relative. The bride did not notice her, but her family and the groom did. They got divorced shortly after the wedding, and my relative is now married to his work wife. Story 76. A couple of the groomsmen burst out laughing when the father of the bride started crying while giving his daughter away. I was one of the groomsmen, but not one of the ones laughing. The father of the bride was a burly, gruff military man, and there was something about seeing someone we had always feared crying while Butterfly Kisses played over the speakers that made a couple of the guys lose it. I felt bad because it was inconsiderate. Story 77. The very pregnant sister of the groom started going into labor and had to give birth that night. It was not a terrible thing, but it was very unexpected. Story 78. The groom's friends secretly added Viagra to his drink to laugh at him for getting lift off in front of everyone. Story 79. The caterers dropped the giant cake. Some people went to the grocery store and bought every sheet cake available. It turned out to be enjoyable because we each got to have whichever kind of cake we wanted. Story 80. At a wedding where I was performing, the bride and groom had just kissed, and I was about to introduce them as Mr. and Mrs. Suddenly, one of the bridesmaids passed out and fell to the floor, her dress over her head and thong exposed. The bride and groom didn't skip a beat. Rolling their eyes, they barely even glanced at her. They knew she was faking for attention, and this was what she chose. We finished the ceremony with her on the floor. Story 81. The bride kissed her ex the night before the wedding, and the ex secretly recorded it and played it during the wedding reception. I believe you all know what happened next. What a crazy time to be alive and to love. Story 82. At the reception, when the bride and groom, my cousin, arrived, they gave brief speeches before dinner and dancing. He spoke about how hard she worked and encouraged everyone to enjoy the food, as it had been very stressful for her. He also expressed his love for her and his excitement for their future. Her speech, on the other hand, focused on her complaints about how stressful the event was and how she just wanted to elope, indicating that she did not truly want any of this. She repeatedly said, "I want to thank myself." She did not mention my cousin at all. It was entirely about her. My aunt looked at me with surprise and confusion. Story 83. My wife walked in on her cousin, the bride, passionately kissing another man. The groom was extremely intoxicated and likely under the influence of opioids, passed out in another room. This was not casual making out. There were hands in inappropriate places. The cousin has a history of imitating my wife in every aspect of her life. Right down to our engagement, she hastily sought someone to marry. I wish I were exaggerating. It is a troubling pattern. This man was practically a random drug user, and soon enough they were getting married a couple of months before us. To make matters worse, she even asked if they could use our wedding decorations, all paid for and set up, for their wedding with promises to return them afterward. Absolutely not. When I entered the hall they rented, it resembled a disorganized gathering. For a moment, I thought I had gone to the wrong place until I spotted a few relatives I recognized. It looked as if someone had gathered together a group of people dressed in a haphazard manner, with some wearing stained outfits. Everything appeared to be thrown together last minute for the sake of being first. The marriage lasted a bit longer than I expected, but when he began to abuse her, that was the end of it. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.